The Statue of Liberty is 305 feet tall and stands on Liberty Island in New York. It's one of the most famous tourist attractions that the Big Apple has to offer. It was given to America as a gift from France in 1886. The statue was designed by a French sculptor called Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi. The face of the statue is thought to be based on Bartholdi's mother, Charlotte. The statue's full name is the Statue of Liberty Enlightening the World, which is a bit of a tongue twister. We'll stick with the shortened version for the rest of this video. The total cost to build the statue was over $500,000. In today's economy, that would be worth about $10 million. It took 5 years to raise the necessary amount of money to build the statue. The project was completed in France in 1885. The statue was then disassembled into 350 pieces so that it could be transported to America. A French ship called Isère transported the statue from Paris to New York. However, a disaster nearly prevented the statue from arriving. The ship almost sank in a bad storm during the voyage. It took 4 months to reassemble the 350 pieces when they arrived in New York. The monument was officially unveiled in October 1886. The statue is made from 300 overlapping copper plates. These copper plates weigh a total of 31 tons. A further 125 tons of iron were used to build the statue's foundation. The statue itself weighs 225 tons. Its crown has 25 windows. They're thought to represent the natural minerals of the earth. The Statue of Liberty was the tallest iron structure ever built when it was unveiled in 1886. But today, it doesn't even crack the top 5 when it comes to the tallest existing statues. Let's take a look at several monuments from around the world, which, in some cases, tower over the famous New York monument. But before we get down to the giants in the world of statues, you should know something. Not all of the most famous statues are physically imposing spectacles. Some of the most renowned monuments are actually quite tiny. This includes the Iron Boy, located in one of the backyards in Stockholm, Sweden. The sculpture depicts a small boy wrapping his arms around his knees. It was created by a Swedish artist called Lis Eriksson in 1967. The statue is only 6 inches tall. The tiny monument's full name translates to Little Boy Who Looks at the Moon, but people shortened it for their own convenience. The Iron Boy receives all kinds of strange gifts throughout the year. Sometimes he can be seen wearing a cap or a scarf. Guests also leave coins, fruits, and sushi on the stone bench where he sits. There's another famous world monument that's literally as tiny as a mouse. Actually, 2 mice. The monument is called the Philpott Lane Mice and can be found in London. It depicts 2 mice fighting over a piece of cheese. The statue was constructed in 1862. The story claims that once, 2 construction workers had an argument. One was accused of having stolen the other's lunch. This tiny monument is said to be left as a tribute to the event. Starting off the top 5 of the tallest monuments in the world is the Statue of Belief. It's found in Nathdwara, India. It stands at an impressive 348 feet tall. The statue depicts Shiva, an important symbol of Hinduism. About 2,200 tons of steel were used in the construction of the massive statue. A 300-square-foot garden surrounds the statue. More than 750 workers took part in the construction of the monument. Its size allows it to be seen from Kankroli flyover, which is roughly 13 miles away. The construction works began in 2012, but the statue was completed just recently. It's probably no surprise that it serves as a major tourist attraction in Nathdwara today. The Yoshigu Buddha statue is located in Tsukuba in Japan. It's the 4th tallest statue in the world, with a height of 393 feet. The monument weighs an incredible 4,000 tons and was built in 1993 to commemorate the birth of Shinran, a famous Japanese monk. The left hand of the monument is 60 feet long. Tourists can ride an elevator to the viewing gallery, located at almost 280 feet. From here, visitors are treated to incredible views. On a clear day, You can see as far as Tokyo Skytree, which is roughly 42 miles away from the monument. The lovely gardens surrounding the statue are full of flowers in season. Visitors can pick some and take them home. You can see cosmos in September and October, poppies in May, and peonies and hydrangeas in May and June. The third tallest monument on our planet is the Laikyun Setkyar. It's found in a village called Katakan Taung in Myanmar. The statue is 423 feet tall. The construction of the monument began in 1996, and it took 12 years to finish. The monument was presented to the public in February 2008. The construction took so much time because it was funded by the public. The monument is a depiction of Buddha Shakyamuni, who many believe to be the founder of Buddhism. The sculpture is painted yellow, which is considered to be the color of wisdom in Buddhism. Each element of the monument is extremely precise and detailed. Many tourists have no idea that inside the monument there's a special elevator that provides access to 27 different floors. Visitors can enter the statue and look at different paintings on the walls of the lower floors. The inside of the monument also houses a temple. The area outside the statue is a popular landmark for tourists too. Here you can find the surrounding garden of Bodhi trees with more than 9,000 plants. Not only are there plenty of plants next to the monument, but there are also thousands of miniature sitting Buddha statues. Keeping with the theme of monuments depicting Buddhas, the runner-up in the competition for the world's largest monument is the Spring Temple Buddha. You'll find it in Henan, China. It's over 500 feet tall. The monument is made up of over 200 pounds of gold, 3,300 tons of copper alloy, and 1,500 tons of steel. It also covers an area of over 11,000 square feet. The diamond seat beneath the statue consists of 6,666 miniature Buddhas. It took 11 years to construct. Construction works began in 1997, and the statue was unveiled in 2008. The entire Spring Temple project cost roughly $50 million, with $18 million spent directly on the materials and construction of the monument. You've waited this long. It's now time to find out the identity of the world's tallest statue. The Statue of Unity is in the state of Gujarat in India. Its height? Just under a record-breaking 600 feet. Worth the wait, right? The statue is a tribute to the Iron Man of India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. He served as the first Deputy Prime Minister of India from 1947 until 1950. He's credited with merging over 560 princely states into what we now know as the Union of India. Remarkably, when compared to the other statues we've looked at, the Iron Man only took 3.5 years to build. It was constructed by a team of 300 engineers and 3,400 workers. The monument is made up of roughly 70,000 tons of cement and nearly 25,000 tons of steel. 12,000 bronze panels cover the structure. The base of the monument is constructed with over 129 tons of scrap iron, donated by nearly 100 million farmers from across India. All in all, the statue weighs a total of 1,700 tons. The Statue of Unity has a viewing gallery that can accommodate 200 visitors at a time. It also hosts a museum with 2,000 photographs, 40,000 documents and video presentations, and a research center. The whole thing is nearly twice the size of the Statue of Liberty. Wow!
So how come the world is still talking about a statue that only existed for a mere 54 years over 2,000 years ago? What made this impressive ancient construction so remarkable that we're still discussing it? I'm talking about the Colossus of Rhodes, of course. It's considered to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, along with the Great Pyramid of Giza or the Gardens of Babylon. There are a lot of mysteries surrounding this ancient statue, but let's look at some of the facts first, shall we? What we do know is that the local Rhodians decided to start a massive project once a Macedonian siege over their island was over. In other words, it was their way of honoring the higher powers for their victory. Using a lot of material left behind by the Macedonians, they started the construction of the Colossus, which is estimated to have taken about 12 years. Most contemporary descriptions of the sculpture agree that it stood about 105 feet tall. Now, just to compare, that's about the size of the Statue of Liberty today, which is 151 feet tall. It may not seem like a lot. I mean, Lady Liberty is currently ranked as the 52nd tallest statue in the world. The champion here would be the Statue of Unity in India, standing proud at an astonishing 597 feet. But for ancient times, that was quite an accomplishment. But is the similar height the only connection between the Colossus of Rhodes and the Statue of Liberty? Not really. We do know that they both also refer to Lady Liberty as the modern Colossus, since both statues were constructed as a symbol of liberation. There's even a plaque placed inside the pedestal of the New York statue, inscribed with the first verse of the sonnet, "The New Colossus," not like the brazen giant of Greek fame. To build this massive Colossus statue, they sure needed a lot of bronze. Some ancient records even recount that the construction required 27,000 to 29,000 pounds of bronze. Even for modern times, this is a lot, but back then, they even called it an operation that involved the bronze industry of the entire world. The man tasked with bringing the statue to life was Charles of Lindos, a local Greek sculptor. The whole construction took place from 294 to 282 BCE, but unfortunately, Charles never got to see the end result. We don't know for sure why that happened, but some records claim constructing the Colossus of Rhodes may have led him to complete bankruptcy, since he failed to accurately estimate the cost for the massive statue. Anyway, we still don't know for sure how it was possible to build a statue this big back in those days. They had none of the equipment we have today, like excavators or elevators. Some old records said that they had to invent a completely new, custom method to build it. It all happened on the location, put together piece by piece. They supposedly split the statue into many different sections, and the first one to be constructed was the feet. Once each section was done, huge mounds of earth were placed around it, so they could continue working on the next section above. However, these records were made more than 100 years after the Colossus was finished, so there's little we can say about the accuracy of this information. In all those 12 years, the local Greeks worked around the clock to build the Colossus of Rhodes. They started with a white marble base that they placed at the statue's feet. They then continued with some sort of an iron skeleton, to which they attached the bronze plates. Why did they choose bronze, though? Well, that was more for practical reasons, since bronze is stronger than iron and it can also sustain extreme weather conditions. More so, if you think about it, the statue was located pretty close to the sea, so the air surrounding it would have been pretty salty. That's why they needed to make it out of quite sturdy material. And what about the location? Well, that's something that has been up for debate for a long time. Researchers initially believed that the statue stood with each leg on either side of the Mandrake Harbor, one of many in the city of Rhodes, basically straddling its entrance. As imposing as that may sound, it was likely not the case. First of all, that would have meant the harbor would have to have been closed for the whole duration of the construction, which doesn't seem to match all the other records. More so, after the statue had fallen, it would have probably blocked the entirety of the harbor, which again doesn't seem to be mentioned anywhere. Most recent depictions say that it most likely stood either on the eastern side of the Mandrake Harbor or maybe even further inland. So, what happened to this impressive structure? Is there really nothing left of it to this day? And why did it survive for only 54 years, since it took so long to build and it was so important for locals? Well, as admired and valued as it was to the Greeks, an earthquake took the Colossus of Rhodes away from them. The story goes that because of the movement of the earth beneath it, the statue snapped at its knees and was completely laid on the ground. Nonetheless, the statue still continued to be admired for centuries. The Rhodians refused to rebuild it as they considered it a sign and did not dare intervene with destiny. By the middle of the 7th century, they had taken away what was left of the statue completely. Legend says it took about 900 camels to carry all the bronze away from the location. And what about the looks of the statue? This is also one aspect that is still shrouded in mystery. Even though it was a symbol of the locals' pride in maintaining their independence, they did not use the depiction of the statue for any of the coins they made, even though that was kind of customary. Other art historians do think, however, that the Colossus was similar to other depictions of the same mythological creature, a male figure that had rays of light rising from its head. The position of its hands is also still up for debate. Some say it might have even been holding a torch. We don't know if his hands were pointed straight down or whether the right arm was raised, like in similar representations in Greek mythology. The original might not be here for us to admire anymore, but there are some plans out there to rebuild it. A group of European architects intends to build a 21st century version of the ancient statue. This new construction is planned to stretch 500 feet tall. It should serve as a cultural center combined with a lighthouse. To make sure it won't have the same destiny as its ancient ancestor, these designers intend to use a lot of technology available today. Firstly, they plan to cover the whole exterior of the modern Colossus with solar panels so that the enormous building has enough electricity. They also intend to use modern resources to make sure earthquakes and wind forces won't affect the massive structure yet again. To do that, they plan to build the statue as a tripod structure, made from its two legs and a third pillar of support, constructed from the sash draped over the statue's arm and touching the ground. They also plan to place heavy steel support around the base for counterbalance. They even thought of a suspension system that would permit the statue to rock back and forth, making it a bit more flexible and able to resist all the various weather conditions. The manufacturer's suggested retail price on this project is quite high though, estimated at around $283 million. Supporters of the modern Colossus are optimistic as they are certain they can raise that impressive amount of cash through crowdfunding and private investments.
Imagine you can spend an entire week digging in the ground, scanning for ruins, and taking photographs of the world's most surreal archaeological sites. Would you be up for it? Grab your magnifying glasses and let's do some digging. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Walk around the city stumbling upon ancient history, So you're strolling around Esquiline Hill on a sunny afternoon. You have just finished your third gelato when you suddenly see it. The magnificent Domus Aurea, or Golden House, for the non-Latin speakers. The Roman Emperor Nero ordered to build this huge palace back in 64 BCE. The construction finished in 68 BCE. In its glory days, it occupied an area 3 times the size of the Vatican City. The building had gold leaf decor, semi-precious stones, and tons of frescoes. There were over 300 rooms in the palace, some of them overlooking the beautiful vineyard and animal-filled woods nearby. It held an enormous 100-foot statue of Nero himself. The octagonal wall was the grandest construction in the complex. Originally, it was a banquet hall with waterfalls cascading down the back walls. The hall rotated around its axis day and night as petals fell from above. Nero's successors stripped the whole palace of its materials. Today, tourists can visit the main structure and, of course, the octagonal hall. They excavated it, and you'll easily recognize it even with its bare walls. After flying halfway across the world, we're deep in the Cambodian jungle. Good thing you brought bug spray with you. Mosquitoes can get crazy in this tropical climate. Hidden among the forest is the city of Angkor. It was the capital of the Khmer Empire from the 9th to 15th century. FYI, the word Angkor means capital city in the Khmer language. The city became one of the largest in the pre-industrial world. Researchers say nearly 1 million people used to live there. Today, Angkor attracts visitors from around the world because of its stunning architecture. You can recognize the Khmer style in the use of huge blocks of sandstone. At the center of the complex lies Bayon Temple. It's decorated with 216 smiling faces, which scientists say are meant to resemble the founder of the Angkor Empire. They believe the towers used to be decorated with gold, But today, the site is a maze of vine-covered temples. The city was abandoned in 1431 and wasn't rediscovered until the 1840s. In 1992, they named it a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The United States is not usually synonymous with ruins, but here's one. In the mountainous state of Colorado lies the ancient home place of ancestral Pueblans. Throughout the Mesa Verde National Park, there are over 600 cliff dwellings built by the Pueblans around the 1190s. The Cliff Palace alone had over 150 rooms. It was a multi-story building of sandstone and mud mortar. To arrive at the balcony house, visitors had to climb a 32-foot ladder. There, you can see a mid-sized village of 38 rooms and 2 kivas. Kivas are traditional chambers built by Pueblans for ceremonial purposes. By 1300, the Pueblan occupation of the Mesa Verde ended. Thankfully, the site is open for visits now. If you like terracotta landscapes, you came to the right place. The city of Petra is a marvel of the ancient world. Located in Jordan's desert, the city was a commercial hub back in the 4th century BCE. The Nabateans, an Arab Bedouin tribe, lived in the so-called Rose City and thrived for many years, accumulating a significant amount of wealth. They invented an innovative water management system that made the region habitable. The rock-carved gate-like structure Petra is famous for is what is called the Pharaoh's Treasury. It stands at the main entrance to the site and is said to have a hidden treasure beneath it. In the early 2000s, the site was named one of the 7 new wonders of the world. All the way in South America, in the country of Guatemala, lie ancient Mayan ruins. The lost city of Tikal is a site made of 12,000 buildings, the remains of the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. It is comparable in importance to London or New York. The North Acropolis is Tikal's most ancient complex of monuments. Built solely by human hands in 750 BCE, it served as the resting place of kings and chiefs. Back in the day, the step pyramid temples were painted a beautiful red. Mayans loved that color. Today, of course, you'll only see the limestone. Archaeologists have no clue as to the cause of Tikal's decline. Was it drought, disease, or something else altogether? Located on the left bank of the river Tigris is a strange old ruin, a battered archway. It belonged to a city named Ctesiphon, the jewel of the Persian Empire for over 800 years. The city hosted an extravagant palace, decorated with a glass mosaic, jewel-adorned carpets, and a lot of marble. What is it with royalty and marble anyway? The arch was part of an imperial palace complex. Until modern times, it was the largest man-made freestanding vault. Notice how there are no pillars sustaining it. The enormous wealth of the city made it a constant target for other empires, until it eventually fell. In the mood for some more Mayan ruins? Chichen Itza is an archaeological site with the best preserved pyramids on Earth. Located in Mexico's Yucatan state, this Mayan city is well over 1,500 years old. At its peak, it was home to 35,000 people. The site has a total of 26 ruins to be uncovered. The highlight here is El Castillo, a tremendous step-like temple standing 80 feet above the ground. Its most peculiar feature is that it has 91 steps up each of its 4 sides, including the upper platform. It makes for 365 steps, the number of days in the solar year. The oldest lost city in this list dates back to the Neolithic period. It was when us, human beings, started farming for the first time, instead of living a fully nomadic lifestyle based on hunting and gathering. Located on Orkney Island off the coast of Scotland is a prehistoric site known as Skara Brae. Thanks to good restoration, the site is very well preserved. You can see prehistoric dwellings with hearths, stone-built furniture, and even primitive toilets. Researchers found runic symbols on the site, which means they could have attempted some form of writing. Ah, Greece. Fancy some feta cheese, anyone? We've arrived at the focal point of archaeological sites, but today we're exploring one in particular, the Colossus of Rhodes. also known as the Bronze Giant. It used to be one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, standing in the harbor of the Greek city of Rhodes back in the 3rd century BCE. The Colossus was said to be 105 feet tall. It's believed that the statue was built with the help of 900 camels. Sadly, it only stood for 54 years. A ravaging earthquake tore it to pieces, so visitors would come and see only a giant foot. Now, there is a whole load of nothing where the statue once stood. I think it's safe to say there are a lot of random ruins on walls spread across the globe. And our final visit for the day consists of exactly those. All the way in northern England lies the ruin of Hadrian's Wall. The Roman emperor commissioned the wall in order to separate his empire from Britain's. The original wall was a lot grander than what is left of it today. But still, the ruins are pretty impressive. They consist of a 73-mile structure stretching from one coast to the other. Back in the day, Hadrian's Wall hosted 17 large forts and numerous observation towers to ensure the maximum safety of his empire. The wall fell into oblivion when the Romans left Britain at the start of the 5th century. People began looting it to build churches, farms, and even houses. Today, if you decide to visit the ruins, you'll only see waist-high fragments of stone. But still, pretty neat, huh?
The moai statues have been standing tall and proud for hundreds of years. Once people put an enormous effort into carving these grand sculptures, and then they just suddenly stopped making them. But why? Let's figure out this mystery. Easter Island, located 2,500 miles east of Tahiti, has an area of 63 square miles. To this day, it's one of the most isolated islands in the world. Once it was covered with forests, filled with different trees and ferns. But when the first humans came to the island around 400 CE, the forest slowly began to disappear. And starting from 1250 CE, moai statues began appearing all over the place. People made them from different types of rock: compressed volcanic ash, basalt, trachyte, and red scoria. As it's a volcanic island, these were all the ingredients the creators of the statues had to use. And once the builders completed their work, they covered the statues with pumice. The faces of the statues are different, but they all have distinct expressions, with heavy brows and large noses. Their arms are carved into the body. Some have hats on top of their heads. There are nearly 900 statues all over the island. They differ in size. The average height is 13 feet tall, and the largest ones reach 33 feet in height and weigh up to 82 tons. Because the statues have so many different faces, there are theories that they represent and honor ancestors, chiefs, and other important people who lived on the island. But without any clear evidence, it's almost impossible to figure out the true purpose of the moai. Once they stood beautifully along the coast, watching over people in settlements, and their backs faced toward the spirit world of the sea. When Europeans first discovered the moai statues in the 1700s, many of them had already toppled over, and the construction of statues had stopped way earlier than that. Huge amounts of effort were put into making these things. Expert craftspeople spent a great deal of time slowly carving the statues with basic picks. A team of up to 6 people would work hard for an entire year to make just one statue. Then they often had to transport it to its special place on the island, as far as 11 miles. With the help of carbon dating, experts have managed to figure out that the statues started to appear in 1250 CE. And then, suddenly, in 1500 CE or so, the process just stopped. The creators of the statue just left their stone chisels where they were last used, and only a quarter of all the statues were actually placed where they were supposed to be. Half of them still remained in the quarry, while others were left on the ground mid-transit. Something happened on the island, and it caused everyone to just lose interest in the statues. There are many theories around why it could happen, and they mostly relate to deforestation. Islanders may have used wood to move the statues across the island. They possibly did this with the help of sleds and ropes, or even used logs to roll the statues or canoes to float them. The wood started to deplete eventually. Trees on the island took very long to grow, and rats ate most seeds. People had many uses for wood, And they needed it not only for practical things, but also to create other statues. Another reason why the inhabitants of the island could have stopped building the statues might be that they were busy with other projects. Specialized rock gardens were becoming more common with a growing population. They were great for the soil, keeping it warm and fertilizing it at the same time. Islanders spent much time and effort making these rock gardens, and there simply wasn't enough time to focus on building and moving the statues. Another theory suggests that what people believed in changed over time. Supposedly, the islands once saw the statues as a connection to their ancestors. After some time, though, rituals depicting a show of strength and endurance became more widespread. And with these rituals, islanders started to carve images related to seabirds. Seabirds became the main animal on the island. People started to believe that their ancestors looked over them through birds instead of the statues, so there was no longer a reason to build the moai. Anyway, these theories might be true, but the main problem was that the small island couldn't support a growing population. What was once a lush land covered in forests quickly became a barren landscape. For the first few centuries, people relied on forest resources, but agriculture became more important sometime after 1550, when forests disappeared. Tribes that once worked together to build the fantastic monoliths focused on competing against one another instead. During this struggle for land and resources, the moai statues were toppled over because people wanted to reduce their significance. Over the following centuries, all the statues were pushed over, but not all of them deliberately. Many fell naturally after being neglected for so long. Some even ended up in the ocean water surrounding the island, and there they sat for a while. But there was some good news for these statues. They were re-erected, providing a great experience for visitors from all over the world. If you make a journey all the way to this isolated island, the first question you'll probably ask will not be how the statues were made or how they were moved. It will be, how on earth did anyone even make it here in the first place? It was one of the most amazing feats ever. The Polynesians sure did some pretty extraordinary things. From as early as 1500 BCE, these boat-faring people began to explore their world. They used the most advanced marine inventions of their time. They sailed across the ocean in catamarans and outrigger boats, starting in Southeast Asia and inhabiting many more places throughout the Pacific. They lived as far north as Hawaii in 900 BCE and all the way to the south in New Zealand by 1200 BCE. And the farthest journey to the east was, of course, Easter Island. In only a few hundred years, these early sailors inhabited an area of thousands of square miles. They simply memorized where they had already been and, this way, managed to navigate the ocean. They used a wide range of techniques. They watched the sun as it rose and set during the day. Stars helped them at night. If it was overcast and sailors couldn't figure out direction visually, they used other brilliant methods. They watched the movements of ocean currents and wave patterns and paid attention to bioluminescence in the water. These patterns helped them find where specific islands were located. These seafarers even understood how islands and atolls in the distance caused air and sea interference patterns. Birds provided them with certain signs too. Some of them migrated long distances from one island to another, which gave travelers some kind of a visual connection for their route. Other types of birds had specific feeding times. Sailors knew when and where they hunted and directed their boats depending on where these birds fed. Vikings certainly get way too much credit for their seafaring abilities. Where they used a sun compass, the early Polynesians relied purely on the knowledge of how nature itself could guide them. Their skills were so advanced that in 1769, Captain James Cook, an English explorer, even hired a Polynesian navigator because of his extensive knowledge of the seas. But even more surprising was the fact that he drew a map from memory. It covered an area that was 2,000 miles wide. In this region, there were 130 islands, and the navigator knew 74 of those islands by name. At the beginning of their voyage, Captain Cook often disregarded the navigator's advice, but toward the end of their journey, he was very impressed. He also recognized the Polynesians as possibly the most widespread nation on Earth.
Today we're going to an art history trip. Our main focus is to unravel the mystery of whether or not ancient statues has always been white. We'll visit museums and even time travel to try and get a glimpse of what these statues were really like back in the day. To kick off our tour, we land in New York. We climb the famous steps of the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and walk inside this enormous museum. You walk down the aisle and get to the room where one of the world's biggest collections of ancient Greek and Roman statues is held. Admiring the large array of statues, one thing seems evident. They are mainly white. It makes sense since their primary material is white marble. For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and researchers in general have always taken this fact for granted. Weren't these statues always white? Until recent decades, this wasn't something that people discussed. But in the 1980s, researchers unearthed an ancient Greek statue that was clearly pigmented. This new discovery made them wonder, were all ancient statues painted? Let's take a close look at this work of art. This 3rd century before the Common Era Greek statue was discovered to be almost entirely painted, still in its original form. You don't have to look too hard to notice that the statue still carries some of these original pink colors, with some shades of blue and red paint as well. The thing is, this statue is not an exception, it's the norm. As it turns out, ancient civilizations did paint their sculptures with bright and vivid colors, but somewhere along our historic timeline, this information got lost. According to researchers, pigment in sculptures was a way of bringing their representations closer to real life. We live in bright colors, so art might as well reflect that, right? Right! So let's take a few steps back to understand what happened. So why are our museum's galleries filled with white statues as far as the eye could see? You might have heard of Michelangelo. It's a famous Italian sculptor who carved the iconic David and painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo was one of the most emblematic painters of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a historical period when European artists, philosophers, and scientists developed a renewed interest in the creations of ancient Greece and Rome. Artists like Michelangelo started a series of Roman sculptures, like this one, the Laocoon and his sons. They fell in love with their lifelike figures and pristine white marble. The one thing they didn't know, and didn't have the technology to know, was if the colored pigments from those sculptures had faded. After all, they were found after years of being buried or left in the open air. It's speculated that this statue, the Laocoon, had colored snakes and mantles, for example. When the Renaissance artists set out to pay homage to ancient artists, they left their masterpieces bare too. They carved directly onto the marble and left them white, without pigmentation. Probably because that's the way they thought things were done in the old days. The works of Michelangelo and his peers influenced a whole generation of sculptors after that. So this way of doing art traveled to modern times without much questioning. However, evidence of color pigments in ancient statues is abundant. Some researchers show that scholars have known for at least a century that ancient sculptures weren't originally all white. Other studies suggest that this discovery might have happened even earlier. In early 1980s, archaeologist Vincent Brinkmann made a huge discovery. During his time as a student at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, he developed a technology that was able to detect polychromy in ancient samples of Greek statues. Polychromy is an art of painting in several colors. Anyways, he was taken aback by his discovery and confused as to why and how other researchers and archaeologists weren't talking about this. As it happens, the first discovery that ancient statues weren't all that white happened a long time ago, way before Vincent was born. It happened during the unearthing of Pompeii back in the 1700s. As you may know, the city of Pompeii in southern Italy was completely covered with lava after the sudden eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The city was destroyed, but the clouds of ashes that arose from the lava managed to preserve a lot of the city's structure through time. Thankfully for art historians and archaeologists, Pompeii became a digging ground for understanding ancient Rome. Researchers found several conserved frescoes that depicted scenes of daily Roman life. In one of these paintings, an artist is seen painting a sculpture. This fact was recorded by a very famous art historian known as Johann Joachim Winckelmann. He is also considered the father of art history. Now let's take a closer look at another famous statue. To see this one in person, you'll have to fly all the way to Rome and visit the Vatican museums. The statue you're looking at is a classic representation of Caesar Augustus. In case you didn't know, he was the founder of the Roman Empire and the first emperor of Rome. He is important. The sculpture you're seeing is called the Augustus of Prima Porta. You may have seen this before, probably in a history textbook. The thing is, it's always depicted in its white marble form. But according to an archaeological finding from the 1860s, the original statue was way much more colorful than that. According to archaeologists, the statue of Augustus de Prima Porta has a crimson tunic, yellow armor, and a purple mantle. It's important to keep in mind that colors weren't made artificially as they are today. Artists could only produce color from natural resources, so purple, for example, was an extremely difficult color to make. Back in the day, they derived purple from the mucus of a rare species of snail, meaning that anyone who used the color purple to pigment their art and clothes was powerful and wealthy. Well, this looked like enough proof for me that ancient statues weren't always white. But as we can judge by the look of our modern museums, there didn't seem to exist enough interest in the art community to further explore polychromy on the ancient statues. But remember that archaeologist we talked about, Brinkman? Well, he has been collecting data on polychromy since the 1980s. At a certain point, he even began making colored replicas of such statues. The technology used is far from simple. To reconstitute these ancient works of art, Brinkman makes a 3D plaster copy of them. Then he paints them by hand with the help of his wife. To find out which color were used in the original sculptures, Brinkman uses UV light. Certain pigments glow under UV light, exposing traces that would otherwise be invisible. Take this colorful archer as an example. Look at these colors. This piece is the reconstruction of a marble archer in the costume of a horseman. To accurately depict the archer, restorers had to research a lot about the history of the region where the art piece was originally found, since colors have a cultural meaning. That, together with UV technology, allowed for the reconstruction you can now see. It seems very far from the idea we have of what the Greeks would make, but this is supposed to look exactly like the original one. According to Brinkman, we shouldn't be so surprised that ancient Western civilizations used bright colors to depict their realities. After all, the Romans and Greeks were heavily inspired by the works of art of Egyptian civilization, Old Mesopotamia, and Asia. For example, if you look at the famous Egyptian Sphinx, you might be led to believe that it always looked that way, but that wasn't at all the case. Modern studies and virtual reconstructions of the monument show us that the monument was very colorful. The body of the statue is believed to have been painted terracotta, while the regal headdress that circles the head is meant to have been golden blue. All of these were considered important colors in Egyptian times, and it was only suitable to use them to depict a pharaoh.
The Statue of Liberty wasn't always the iconic green color that we know today. The statue originally consisted of copper skin over the iron framework, making Lady Liberty appear a bright bronze color. Over the years, the copper began to oxidize, forming a protective layer called patina, and creating a bright green hue. It took 30 years for Lady Liberty to turn fully green. If the statue's sculptor Bartholdi had it his way, Lady Liberty would never have been green, or even copper for that matter. The architect originally intended for the statue to be a lighthouse. In order for the lighthouse to be visible at night, Bartholdi planned to wrap the entire sculpture in gold leaf so that it would glow under the moonlight. This idea was rejected because it would have been far too expensive. New York isn't the only city to have its own Lady Liberty. You can find a much smaller version of the sculpture within the entrance hall to this famous museum in Paris. This mini Lady Liberty was crafted by Bartholdi shortly after the original statue was erected for the 1900 Paris Exposition, a world fair held in France to celebrate the achievements of the previous century. There's gold in the metal the torch is made of, but if you look closely at it, you can see that it's not the original torch that was brought here from France. About 100 years after the statue was installed, in 1986, frequent rains and leaking water damaged the torch, and it had to be replaced. At first, the old torch was displayed as a museum piece just inside the pedestal at the entrance. But recently, a new museum was built on the island, and the torch was moved there. Some rumors about the statue say that Thomas Edison once wanted to make it speak. He wanted to put a huge phonograph in it, the sound of which could have been heard even in Manhattan. Good thing this never became reality. It would have been unbearably noisy on the island, and it would have sounded creepy. Lady Liberty arrived from France on June 17, 1885, in over 300 copper pieces in 214 crates on the French ship Isère. It got into a terrible storm and nearly sank. The statue could have been moved to Baltimore, Boston, San Francisco, or Philadelphia. When New York didn't have enough money to pay for the pedestal, these cities were willing to pay for the whole construction on condition of its relocation. In 1983, David Copperfield made the statue disappear in front of a crowd. They were sitting on a platform, and the illusionist opened the curtain and showed them a big empty nothing in Lady Liberty's place. In reality, the platform was slowly moving until it reached an angle from which the statue couldn't be seen behind one of the towers on the platform. It's believed that Charlotte, the mother of Frederick Bartholdi, who was the statue's sculptor, became the model for its face. In 1876, one French senator met her at the opera. He was shocked to see a live version of the statue. Some people think that Lady Liberty has a male face. According to them, it doesn't look much like Bartholdi's mother, but is a copy of his brother. Frederick knew his face in every detail because he spent hours watching his brother at the hospital. In the summer, the crown of the statue becomes a temporary home for peregrine falcons. In the winter, owls are often seen there. Many other bird species migrate through Liberty State Park in the spring and fall months, including rare ones. The last official residents of Liberty Island were the family of the superintendent of the Statue of Liberty. They had free housing at Liberty Island until their home was damaged in a 2012 hurricane. At 305 feet tall, when the Statue of Liberty was first built, it was the tallest iron structure in the world. Of course, that has now been far surpassed. The tallest building in the world, Dubai's Burj Khalifa, has a staggering height of over 2,700 feet. That's almost 9 times taller than the Statue of Liberty. The famous sculpture is weatherproof. Lady Liberty is struck by around 600 bolts of lightning every year since she was built. Some photographers have been lucky enough to catch these moments. She's also survived hurricanes, ocean changes, and countless storms. The Statue of Liberty was designed to sway in the wind. During heavy winds, Lady Liberty can sway up to 3 inches in any direction, and its torch can sway 5. The weight of the statue can be compared to the weight of an empty Boeing 737. But this is only the outer skin of Lady Liberty. The metal construction inside, that is, stairs, pylons, and supports, weigh another 125 tons. It's like a small train locomotive. And the concrete base underneath weighs an impressive 27,000 tons. That's like a fleet of 11,000 heavy SUVs, or 180 of the largest blue whales. It took the workers 4 months to fully assemble the statue on the finished pedestal. The statue is connected to the pedestal, so it can't be lifted separately, and the entire metal structure inside can be seen through the glass ceiling of the pedestal. Although interior work was still in progress, you could already see the statue in all its beauty. There's a star-shaped base on the ground. It's the remains of the former Fort Wood on the island. Next comes the granite pedestal, which has its own observation deck, and the statue itself. Visiting Lady Liberty is a good workout. Visitors need to climb 354 steps to reach the crown. Inside the crown, there are 25 windows, providing stunning panoramic views of New York City. It's also much smaller than you thought it would be. Lady Liberty's crown is adorned with 7 individual spikes. Some say these spikes represent the 7 oceans and continents of the world, bearing the universal concept of liberty. Others think they represent rays of sunshine. The Statue of Liberty was first assembled near Parc Monceau in Paris. The locals loved her so much, they called her Lady of the Park. They used 300 different kinds of hammers to shape the copper, which was the weight of an African elephant, into the statue. The statue was finished thanks to one of the first crowdfunding campaigns in history. First, French sculptor Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi, who created the statue, raised funds in his country to build it. Then, over 120,000 donors in the US joined in to give it a pedestal. Lady Liberty received a new torch with a flame during the 1984 renovation. It's made of copper and covered in 24-karat gold leaf. The original torch had to be replaced because of water leakage. You can now see it at the Statue of Liberty Museum. During the same renovation, the statue got a nose patch and a better supporting structure. The original one was slightly imperfect. They found out the head had been installed 2 feet off center, and the arm was 18 inches away from the body. The Lady of the Harbor is as tall as a 22-story building. Her face is as long as a queen-size bed, and her hands are twice as long. If this lady ever wanted to buy shoes, they'd have to be a size 879. Her waistline is as long as a double-decker bus, and she is about 5 times as heavy as a T-Rex. It's practically impossible to see it when you visit, but Lady Liberty is standing on a broken shackle and chains. They stand for breaking free. Her right foot is slightly raised. Bartholdi was thinking of putting chains in the statue's hand first, but ended up giving her a tablet instead. The pedestal now hosts a museum where you can learn all about the statue's history. From there on, you can climb a double metal narrow staircase of 354 steps to the crown. It's so small, it only fits 10 people at a time, but it has an impressive 25 windows. The torch is closed for visitors. Bartholdi was assisted in his designs of Lady Liberty's structure by Gustave Eiffel. He was a famous structural engineer who, you might have guessed from his name, is famous for designing the Eiffel Tower. Eiffel designed the framework and structures that support the Statue of Liberty. Liberty Island was only named so in 1956, 70 years after the statue had been installed. Until then, it was known as Great Oyster Island, then Bedloe Island, after a Dutchman who owned it. At some point, it was also called Love Island by order of Governor Francis Lovelace. You can't travel to Liberty Island by a private ship and dock it there. The only allowed official way to get there is by Statue Cruises Ferry.
Although it's tall and massive, the Statue of Liberty doesn't always stand still. When the wind is strong enough, she sways by around 3 inches, and her torch about twice as much. And then on calm days, if you look closely at her feet, you can sometimes catch her doing a little jig underneath that flowing robe. Not really. You know, there is more than one Statue of Liberty. A bronze replica of its little sister that served as a model for the New York statue stands in the Jardin du Luxembourg in Paris. Yeah, I never took French in school, but I try. A quarter-size replica of the iconic monument is on an island in the Seine River, also in Paris. There is also a life-size gold leaf-colored copy of the torch on entrance to a world-famous tunnel in Paris. I'm not even going to try to say that name. Back in New York, if you look very closely at the face of Lady Liberty, you can clearly see that the famous statue was inspired by none other than the 50s pop star Elvis Presley. Nah, I'm just messing with you. The Statue of Liberty was designed by Frederick August Bartholdi 60 years before Elvis was even born. People have different opinions about who really inspired the face of Lady Liberty. According to one theory, the model for her was the beautiful Isabella Boyer. Isabella was born in 1841 to a wealthy family in Paris. When she turned 22, she moved to New York to marry an American entrepreneur and became a socialite. The real unglamorous story is Bartholdi modeled the face after his mother, who, I guess, Elvis looked like. Now, another theory suggests that Lady Liberty might not be modeled after a Western white woman as previously thought. As a young man, Bartholdi went on a trip to Egypt, and after seeing the pyramids, he was inspired to create colossal sculptures. Older and more successful, Bartholdi returned to Egypt to propose a new sculpture at the entrance of the Suez Canal. The sculpture was to be called Egypt Carrying the Light to Asia and depicted a cloaked figure holding a torch to guide travelers through the canal. Well, that one cost too much, but he kept the idea in his head until another opportunity arose in New York Harbor. This is what the statue looked like 135 years ago. Yeah, its color is very different. It's the same color you'd see if you cut through an electrical wire, because the entire outside of the statue is made of copper. About 20 years after it was installed, it turned completely green. That's because the air and the frequent rains gradually oxidized the metal into a coating called patina. And that metal is extremely thin. Designers could have made those sheets of metal thicker, but then the statue would have been even heavier and it would have fallen under its own weight. A little thinner, and the severe oxidation and corrosion of the metal would have made holes in the statue. The sculptor had thought well about the construction of the statue, and it took more than 10 years to build it. But it all started with this model, made of clay. It was only 4 feet tall. So you would probably be taller than this mini Statue of Liberty, even with its arm raised. The next model was made of plaster. By increasing the size, the sculptor could add and refine the details of the statue. For example, a detail that you would never be able to see from Liberty Island or even from the pedestal. It's the shackles by her ankles. It looks as if she has thrown them off, symbolizing freedom. The next model was 33 feet tall, or the length of a school bus. That's about a quarter of the statue's actual size, and it was the maximum size the sculptor could fit in his workshop. Then the sculptor proceeded to create the full-size pieces, the head and the hand holding the torch. The other hand held a stone tablet with Roman numerals embossed on it, signifying July 4, 1776, the date of American independence. So, it was time to build the final version of the Statue of Liberty. The constructors needed all the parts of the statue made of plaster first. Here's its head. They took sheets of wood parallel to each other and pushed them against the model. The edges of the sheets then were shaped so that they perfectly replicated the shapes and curves of the statue. In other words, it was a mold. Then, the wooden structure was placed on the floor and covered with a sheet of copper the thickness of a penny. All that was left was to carefully shape the sheet of copper into the curves of the statue with soft wooden mallets and a press. The statue and pedestal together cost $500,000 to build. French supporters raised funds to build the statue, and Americans paid for the pedestal it would stand on. In today's money, that would be over $10 million. The statue was completed in France and then shipped to America, packed in hundreds of wooden crates. Over 200,000 Americans waited to greet the ship carrying Lady Liberty as it arrived in New York Harbor. The statue was assembled in 4 months on Bedloes Island, which is now known as Liberty Island. Now, a mistake might have been made when the Statue of Liberty was assembled. During an inspection in 1982, workers realized that her head had been installed 2 feet off-center. Yeah, sometimes I feel like that too. Shortly down the road, in front of this famous Paris tunnel, is the Flame of Liberty. This is a full-size replica of the flame from Lady Liberty's torch covered in gold leaf. This monument was gifted to France in 1989 from donors across the world as a thank you for the Statue of Liberty and as a symbol of the Franco-American friendship. About 4.5 million people visit the famous statue every year. By comparison, around 3.25 million people visit the London Eye each year. This makes the Statue of Liberty one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. Almost 100 years after the statue was erected, Lady Liberty's torch was given a makeover. In 1984, the statue's original copper and glass torch was replaced with a new one covered in 24-karat gold leaf. The torch is the only place not accessible to visitors due to damage it previously sustained, making it unsafe to climb up there. The Statue of Liberty is 150 feet tall. That's like 10 giraffes sitting on each other's necks. Compared to the size of a person, you'd have to stand on the shoulders of your 25 friends to reach the torch in its right hand. The concrete base and pedestal make the statue even taller, 305 feet from the ground to the very top. So, let's get inside the thing. We have to go through the doors of a star-shaped base. Then you have a choice. Take the elevator up to the observation deck or go up the 192 steps. You go first. There are stairs for tourists to go up and another staircase to go down to avoid the crowds and traffic. The stairs take you to the height of a 6-story building, right up to the observation deck at the top of the pedestal. To get to the crown of the statue, we need to go to the 7th floor, where we see a double helix stairway. It runs right inside the iron pylons, the spine of the Statue of Liberty, designed by none other than Gustav Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower guy. And this stairway is double because there's one side for going up and the other for going down. And there's also some space where you can rest if you get tired while going up. Yeah, I've done it, and yes, you need it. And you need reservations. As you climb the statue, you can see exactly how the 300 copper sheets were attached to the metal frame. The story of how exactly they did that is riveting. And you can also distinguish specific details of the statue, like the folds of the dress and even locks of hair. 354 steps done. Congratulations! You've reached the observation deck in the crown of the Statue of Liberty. It's pretty cozy up there and only fits a couple of people. You can peer out over New York Harbor through 25 glass windows. They symbolize the gems of our planet. And there are powerful lanterns behind you that light up the glass. They turn on at night so that passing ships can see the statue's crown glow. Entry to the torch is not allowed for tourists, but hey, just for you, we'll open it up for a minute. To get up there, you have to go down. Yes, about to the neck of the statue. There's a hatch that leads you through a narrow passage into the right arm of the statue. Then you have to go up the stairs to the wrist, and then another ladder will lead you to the handle of the torch. Open the cylindrical door and, oh my, you're on the highest observation deck of the Statue of Liberty. For many years now, only workers have been allowed access here. Back at the beginning, this arm stood separately in Madison Square Park for 6 years to draw attention to that campaign until the funding issues were resolved. And before it even made it to the U.S., its head had been on display at the World's Fair in Paris to help raise money for the project. The statue's lamp was originally to serve as a lighthouse beacon, but it was not bright enough, just like me, and the light could barely make it to Manhattan. Sculptor Bartholdi offered to cover the entire statue in gold to make it brighter. That idea would have been crazy expensive, so it was never brought to life. The original spikes above its head got rusty, so what you see now was added way later. So I took a little vacation and traveled to the other side of the country, to New York. The Big Apple. The city where more than 8 million people live. The home of Broadway, the Empire State Building, Central Park, and the Statue of Liberty. Now, Lady Liberty came to the United States from France back in 1885 in over 300 copper pieces. She came with instructions, some assembly required, batteries not included. She was a gift from the French people to the Americans, but the receiving party had to prepare the pedestal for her themselves. Instead of New York, the statue could have ended up in Baltimore, Philadelphia, Boston, or even San Francisco. All of these cities were willing to pay for the construction if they got the statue, but New Yorkers wanted it too. They started the fundraising campaign and managed to get all the money needed. So the statue officially called New York home in 1886, where it still resides. Sorry, Philly, I like your cheesesteaks though. Anyway, the Statue of Liberty was my first stop, and I was very excited, but I had no idea what was to come next. Day 1. I arrived at New York City, and first thing, I took the ferry to Liberty Island. I could see her already, far away in the middle of the harbor. As the ferry approached the statue, all the people started to make pictures with her. I wasn't an exception. I asked someone to take a selfie of me, turned away from the statue, looked in the camera, and smiled. But the guy looked shocked. I asked him what was wrong, and he couldn't say anything. He just pointed to the Statue of Liberty. Well, to where it used to be. Because the statue was just gone. He said it was there, but the next second, it just disappeared. Other people saw that too and started to ask each other what happened, but no one had any idea. Still, we reached the dock and got out of the ferry. It felt like it was just some trick, but apparently it wasn't. The Statue of Liberty was really gone, and its pedestal was totally empty. Of course, there were some people who climbed up on it, pretending to be the Statue of Liberty themselves and taking photos. Very soon, authorities arrived and didn't let anyone leave the island. They said they wanted to make an investigation and catch the thief, since the thief should still be there on the island, as if it's actually possible to steal the Statue of Liberty. They interrogated every single person on the island. We spent the whole day there, and in the end, they had to let us go. Who had the Statue of Liberty hidden in their pockets? What a surprise. Day 2. That was one crazy case, so I decided to stick around in New York for a while to watch how the situation would progress. Of course, in the morning, it's all in the newspapers, magazines, and on TV talk shows. All the Times Square banners are showing the photos of the statue with headings, "Have you seen me?" "The Statue of Liberty is gone," and even dramatic ones like, "The theft of the century! The Statue of Liberty is stolen!" Well, the whole Big Apple is mourning the loss. There is some crazy number of people colored in blue-green, like the patina on the statue, wearing dresses and the souvenir foam crown of Miss Liberty. By the way, all the local souvenir stores ran out of those, as well as all those little plastic statues of Liberty too. I'm trying to avoid Instagram or any other social networks. Every celebrity and every single user posts pictures of the statue with a crying emoji and a broken heart. The internet turned into one big memorial. In the evening, the Empire State Building is shining blue-green in honor of the missing statue. Day 5. New York City is even more crowded now. It seems like all of America came to the city to make sure that the statue is actually gone and it's not some internet hoax. Like we need another one of those. Now, the edge of Manhattan from where the ferry used to go to Liberty Island is overcrowded. There are many super loyal fans colored in blue-green, who honestly freak me out a bit, who are staying there all day long, waiting for the statue to somehow come back. No one is allowed to go to Liberty Island. All the best detectives of the world arrive there to investigate this case, trying to figure out what could have happened. Day 10. France officially announced that they'll make a new Statue of Liberty for New York. Well, that's super nice of them, but people keep crying, saying that no new Statue of Liberty can replace the original one, so dearly loved. Do you remember that back in 1885, there were other cities like Boston and Philadelphia that wanted to get the statue? Well, now they're blaming New York for losing a 151-high statue weighing 450,000 pounds, claiming it never would have happened had the statue been set in Boston or Philly, which honestly sounds absurd. Also, did you know that there's more statues of liberty in the world? There's a smaller version of it, which was given by the U.S. citizens to France a couple of years after the original one was set in New York. This little monument, just 37 feet high, has been standing near the Grenelle Bridge in Paris. Well, until a couple of days ago. To comfort the Americans, France transported the little copy from Paris to New York, and they put it on the pedestal instead of the one that was gone. Well, given that this one is more than 10 times smaller than the original, it looks a bit funny. But I guess New Yorkers just can't imagine New York without one, even if it's just a replica. Also, there's a life-size copy of Lady Liberty's torch standing in Paris. Well, that one was also transported to New York and set on Liberty Island as a monument. Meanwhile, the folks in Las Vegas at the New York Casino and Hotel are staying awfully quiet for some reason, trying to stay under the radar about that statue ruckus. Day 20. The world started a huge fundraising campaign to raise the money for the new Statue of Liberty, and then it ended. It took just 2 hours and 47 minutes to raise all the $100 million that was needed. Almost 2 billion people from nearly every single country in the world donated. The construction is going to start in 2 weeks in Paris, France, just like in the good old times. And then it'll be transported to the US again. Boston is still trying to insist that we shouldn't trust New York with the statue anymore. But I don't think they'll manage to persuade the world because this little replica on the pedestal still looks funny. I'll never get used to it. Also, starting today, tourists are allowed to travel to Liberty Island for the first time since the incident. It seems like all of New York wants to visit the island now, so the authorities had to go with a digital queue. All the tickets for the next 2 months are already booked, and it happened in less than 10 minutes. Well, given the 8 million New Yorkers and more than 250 million tourists New York City welcomes every year, I think I'll be able to visit the island about, next decade. Day 31. Crazy news. Can't believe it. The Statue of Liberty, and I mean the original one, is back. They say it appeared in the middle of the night. The smaller replica is now standing next to the pedestal, and the original Lady Liberty is in its rightful place. I needed to see it, so I rushed to the harbor, just like everyone else in New York. It actually is back. No one still knows what happened. The great minds of the world still can't solve the mystery. David Copperfield has an airtight alibi. But if you ask me, I think that the statue just left by itself. Maybe it just needed a vacation. I can picture it chilling on a beach in Central America. Can't blame it. Standing there for more than 100 years without a single day off, always being patient with all the people constantly taking pictures of you. That's not an easy job. I'm glad it took a little vacation. Maybe we won't lose it for another 15 decades. Hey, we were all worried, and she's standing there like nothing happened. Chill out, people. I'm back!
This is Liberty Island, near Manhattan, New York. And here is our hero, the Statue of Liberty. It's 150 feet tall. It's like 10 giraffes sitting on each other's necks. Compared to the size of a person, you'd have to stand on the shoulders of your 25 friends to reach the torch in its right hand. The concrete base and pedestal make the statue even taller, 305 feet from the ground to the very top. The weight of the statue can be compared to the weight of an empty Boeing 737. But this is only the outer skin of the statue. The metal construction inside, that is, stairs, pylons, and supports, weigh another 125 tons. It's like a small train locomotive, and the concrete base underneath weighs an impressive 27,000 tons. That's like a fleet of 11,000 heavy SUVs or 180 of the largest blue whales. And this is what the statue looked like 135 years ago. Yes, its color is very different. It's the same color you'd see if you cut through an electrical wire, because the entire statue is made of copper. About 20 years after it was installed, it turned completely green. That's because the air and the frequent rains gradually oxidized the metal. And that metal is extremely thin. Designers could have made those sheets of metal thicker, but then the statue would have been even heavier, and it would have fallen under its own weight. A little thinner, and the severe oxidation and corrosion of the metal would have made holes in the statue. The sculptor had thought well about the construction of the statue, and it took more than 10 years to build it. But it all started with this model, made of clay. It was only 4 feet tall, so you'd probably be taller than this mini Statue of Liberty, even with its hand raised. The next model was made of plaster. By increasing the size, the sculptor could add and refine the details of the statue. For example, a detail that you would never be able to see from Liberty Island or even from the pedestal, it's the shackles. It looks as if the statue had thrown them off, symbolizing freedom. The next model was 33 feet tall, or the length of a school bus. That's about a quarter of the statue's actual size, and it was the maximum size the sculptor could fit in his workshop. Then, the sculptor proceeded to create the full-size pieces. The head and the right hand holding the torch. The other hand held a stone tablet with the Roman numerals embossed on it, signifying July 4th, 1776, the day the United States signed the Declaration of Independence. Another symbolic detail is the crown. The 7 rays on it represent the 7 seas and 7 continents. In other words, the entire world ocean and the entire landmass. So it was time to build the final version of the Statue of Liberty. The constructors needed absolutely all the parts of the statue made of plaster first. Here, its head. They took sheets of wood parallel to each other and pushed them against the model. The edges of the sheets were then shaped so that they perfectly replicated the shapes and curves of the statue. In other words, it was a cast. Then, the wooden structure was placed on the floor and covered with a sheet of copper. All that was left was to shape the sheet of copper into the curves of the statue with hammers and a press. The sheets were then reinforced on the inside with iron straps. This procedure was repeated 350 times. That's how many separate sheets of copper make up the Statue of Liberty. But if you put it all together, it would simply collapse under its own weight, or be blown away by the wind. And that's where Gustave Eiffel comes in. Yes, this is the French engineer who later built the most famous metal structure in the world, the Eiffel Tower. Gustave Eiffel designed the iron pylon that would serve as the spine of the statue, and then smaller metal structures were added around it. Later, all 350 copper plates of the Statue of Liberty would be attached to it. And here you can already see the shape of the future statue. The metal structures repeat the shape of the torch, head, and the tablet in the left hand. Even though this metal structure weighs over 100 tons, it's still quite flexible. So even now, the fully assembled Statue of Liberty sways a bit. In a strong wind, it can swing 4 inches at the top. It took about 10 years to finish the work. The head of the statue was exhibited in a museum in New York, and its hand with the torch in France. It was to raise money for this project. Even then, visitors were allowed inside the head and torch. Now it was time to send the finished statue to New York, so all the sheets of copper and metalwork were disassembled, packed into 214 boxes, and shipped from France across the Atlantic Ocean. It took the workers another 4 months to fully assemble the statue on the finished pedestal. The statue is connected to the pedestal so it can't be lifted separately, and the entire metal structure inside can be seen through the glass ceiling of the pedestal. Although interior work was still in progress, you could already see the statue in all its beauty. There's the star-shaped base on the ground. It's the remains of the former Fort Wood on the island. Next comes the granite pedestal, which has its own observation deck, and the statue itself. Now let's look inside the structure and try to get to the top. We have to go through the doors of a star-shaped base. Then you have a choice. Take the elevator up to the observation deck, or go up the 192 steps. And there are stairs for tourists to go up and another staircase to go down to avoid the crowds and traffic. The stairs take you to the height of a 6-story building, right up to the observation deck. To get to the crown of the statue, we need to go to the 7th floor, where we see a double helix stairway. It runs right inside the iron pylons, the spine of the Statue of Liberty. And this stairway is double because there's a separate section for going up and the other section for going down. There's also some space where you can rest if you get tired while going up. There's also an elevator, but it holds a maximum of 3 people and is only used in emergencies. As you climb, you can see exactly how the metal sheets were attached to the metal frame. And you can also distinguish specific details of the statue, like the folds of the dress and even locks of hair. So, 354 steps done. Congratulations, you've reached the observation deck in the crown of the Statue of Liberty. It's pretty small and only fits a couple of people. You can look out over New York Bay through 25 glass windows. They symbolize the gems of our planet. And there are powerful lanterns behind you that light up the glass. They turn on at night so that passing ships can see the statue's crown glow. Well, actually, entry to the torch is not allowed for tourists, but just for you, we'll open it up for a minute. To get up there, you have to go down. Yes, about to the neck of the statue. There's a hatch that leads through a narrow passage into the right hand of the statue. Then you have to go up the stairs to the wrist, and then another ladder will lead you to the handle of the torch. Open the cylindrical door, and voila! You're on the highest observation deck of the Statue of Liberty. For many years now, only workers have been allowed access here. There's gold in the metal the torch is made of, but if you look closely at it, you can see it's not the original torch that was brought here from France. About 100 years after the statue was installed, in 1986, frequent rains and leaking water damaged the torch, and it had to be replaced. At first, the old torch was displayed as a museum piece just inside the pedestal at the entrance. But recently, a new museum was built on the island and the torch was moved there. There's a myth that says the Statue of Liberty is a gift from the people of France to the United States to celebrate 100 years of independence. But money for the statue was raised on both sides of the ocean, and the sculptor himself was inspired to build it in Egypt by the statue of the Colossus. Plus, the statue was 5 years too late for the 100th anniversary of independence. Other rumors say that Thomas Edison once wanted to make the statue speak. He wanted to put a huge phonograph in it, the sound of which could have been heard even in Manhattan. Good thing he didn't, because then it would have been unbearably noisy on the island, and it would have looked creepy.
This summer, you finally decide to go on that once-in-a-lifetime round-the-world trip. The first stop of this exciting adventure is in Europe. You start your journey in Italy, the country of pasta and pizza and delicious gelato. Ah, there it is, the world-renowned Leaning Tower of Pisa. You buy your ticket and get inside the crooked monument. You're about to climb 251 slippery stairs, so watch your step and don't forget to breathe. The white marble stones are astounding, and from time to time, you peep outside to enjoy the view of the city. Congratulations, you've made it! You've reached the top of the bell tower and can take all the selfies you want. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is one of Italy's most iconic landmarks. During your hike up the stairs, a guide tells you it's actually a medieval monument. It was built between the 12th and 14th centuries, taking over 200 years to finish. And in case you're wondering if it's always been tilted, I can say without a doubt, yes it has. Once they finished the third floor, the bell tower started sinking. The thing is, the very name Pisa comes from the Greek word that means marshy land. The ground there is extremely soft, made of clay, mud, and sand. And architects have been trying to save the day ever since they built the tower. At the top of the 185-foot-tall monument, you take your time admiring the city. How many terracotta rooftops can you count? If you walk toward the south side of the monument, you may feel closer to the ground. This is because the Leaning Tower of Pisa tilts toward the south. At one point, it leaned almost 5.5 degrees and still didn't fall. Today, when you visit the monument, the guide might tell you the tower is leaning less. A few years ago, the world's best architects and engineers did some construction works next to the monument to keep it from falling over. They dug several tunnels and took out over 38 cubic meters of soil from under the north side of the tower. So now the tower is tilting at an angle of only 4 degrees. So if you want to take one of those classic photos where you're holding up the tower, you better hurry. Who knows how long the tower will still be leaning? Now it's time for you to make your way to Rome. This city is basically an open-air museum, and you have to check it out for yourself. It's scalding hot, but you're lucky. Today, you're visiting the baths of Caracalla. Are you ready for an authentic ancient Roman experience? You enter through what once was a locker room. You'll have to use your imagination. Today, you'll only see 130-foot-tall brick walls here. Romans of every class would spend an hour or two in the baths every day. They would come after a long day at work or before dinner. Imperial bath complexes, such as this one, were usually free, but you had to pay an admission fee. Leaving the locker room, visitors would stop in a heated room where they would receive oil and scrub massage. Then, some people would move on to one of 2 exercise yards. Can you see how ample they were? Here, there were elaborate marble porticos, and you can still see a few fragments of the mosaic-colored floor. If you were in the mood for something more intellectual, you could stop to listen to a philosopher or visit one of the libraries. Now we've arrived at the most impressive room, a caldarium. It was a circular hot steamed room measuring 115 feet in diameter. It had not 1 or 2, but 7 heated pools inside. Above your head, you'd have seen a magnificent dome supported by large granite columns. The entire structure was richly decorated with multicolored glass mosaics and the finest white marble. The complex also housed an indoor Olympic-sized pool with waist-deep water. Today, you can only admire a few reddish walls made of brick and concrete. Emperor Caracalla, like many other Roman emperors, built a mega-complex, and it sure made people happy. After a long international flight, you arrive in Egypt. Get ready for some camel rides and juicy dried fruits. Does anyone here love dates? You leave your hotel at dawn and make your way to the outskirts of Cairo. You drive past the Nile River toward the West Bank. Don't forget to take some pictures. In the distance, you spot a large monument. It's the Great Sphinx of Giza. Can you believe people created this monument over 4,500 years ago? Once you get closer, you see the Great Pyramids just north of the Sphinx. You learn that, unlike the pyramids, the Sphinx was carved directly from the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. Until today, it's one of the largest statues in the world, measuring 66 feet in height and 240 feet in length from pause to tail. The face of the Sphinx looks a tad beaten today, but according to archaeologists, it wasn't always like that. A Photoshop reconstruction of the Sphinx gives it a very different look. As you can see, at one point, the Sphinx's nose was chopped off together with parts of the chin. Scientists believe that the statue is a representation of the great pharaoh Khafra. This is why its face resembles a human so much. Just below the eyes, a dark carved line was added to represent the charcoal eyeliner ancient Egyptians used to wear. Fun fact, this wasn't only a beauty habit, it protected their eyes from ultraviolet rays. In a desert region that gets so much sunlight, this might come in handy. Until today, researchers debate whether or not the Sphinx had a beard. Many believe that if it was meant to depict a pharaoh, it most likely had a braided beard that got destroyed by erosion or humans. Even today, you can still see the remains of a regal headdress on the head of the Sphinx. These head ornaments were associated with power and royalty. Now imagine that the stripes are blue and gold. This is probably what it looked like when the monument was first constructed. There's no evidence of how long it took to build the Sphinx, but it was likely very long, as the carved details are pretty impressive. If you're lucky, your guide might take you to one of the secret chambers inside the statue. If they're real and not just a myth, I mean. The crystalline waters of Greece. Whether you arrive by boat or plane, you're in for a real treat. This is the focal point of archaeological sites. You arrive at Mandrake Marina and Port, but wait a minute, you don't see any monuments around. The Colossus of Rhodes is nowhere to be found at first glance. That's because it was destroyed long ago. Before tumbling down during a mighty earthquake, the great statue was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. If you saw the Colossus in a picture, you would probably mistake it for Lady Liberty. Well, that's actually not a coincidence. Apparently, there's a connection between the Statue of Rhodes and the Statue of Liberty. They were both built as symbols of freedom, and Lady Liberty is often referred to as the modern Colossus. The Colossus stood at 100 feet tall, but today all you see is a concrete jetty with a huge gap in the middle. Now, imagine a bronze statue straddling both ends of the bridge. The Colossus was built back in the 3rd century BCE, and 900 camels took part in the construction. The statue existed for approximately 54 years before it was ruined by a powerful earthquake. It hit the city so hard that all that was left of the statue was one very large foot. Even so, people kept visiting the monument. Are you ready to head home? Thanks for joining me on this journey, and don't forget to tell me what your favorite site was. See you next time! It might come as a surprise that the most expensive piece of art in the world isn't the most famous, though they were both crafted by Leonardo da Vinci. Let's start with the one you've surely heard of, the Mona Lisa. About 10 million people gather to see it each year, curious about her intriguing smile. But it was another of his paintings, Salvator Mundi, that took the record for the most expensive art piece ever sold, $450 million at a Christie's auction. The buyer was a Middle Eastern prince who decided to discreetly snatch this painting back in 2017, probably because it's controversial. For starters, some experts have their doubts about whether Da Vinci really painted it. They say it doesn't quite match the famous painter's usual style. Now, this doesn't mean that the Mona Lisa is cheaper. In fact, it's considered priceless. Some have said it might be worth over $1 billion, but it's hard to make an estimate. Plus, the Louvre Museum, where it's currently displayed, would never let it go. They get loads of visitors each year, and most of them are there to see the Mona Lisa. So, eventually, they make way more money from all those visitors than they would ever make from one payment. They've even gone as far as skipping the high insurance costs of the painting. The strategy is to invest in preserving the artwork. In case it ever gets damaged, no amount of money could replace it anyways. Now, you may wonder, what makes art so valuable? It depends on who you ask, but there are some factors to consider when assessing the value of, say, a painting. Like its age, condition, popularity of the artist, or its backstory. Take the Mona Lisa. It used to be considered a mundane painting up until the 19th century. The fact that it was stolen from the Louvre at one point also added to its mystery and value. When you add the fact that Picasso himself was also called in for questioning regarding the painting's whereabouts, it's easy to understand why Mona Lisa gained so much popularity. The most expensive contemporary painting, however, was sold for a bit over $20 million. It's by a Dutch-American artist who crafted Interchange, this abstract landscape, back in 1955. The artwork features a large pink area that's supposed to look like a lady lying down. There are also splashes of blue, yellow, and orange outlining the woman. By looking at these two paintings, the Mona Lisa and Interchange, we see obvious differences when it comes to style. Older paintings were more about a realistic look, making you feel like you got nature itself trapped on the canvas. Artists were good at classic techniques like mastering the perspective and anatomy of characters. On the other hand, contemporary art is freer, combining different techniques. A good example is abstract painting, like the work of Picasso, for instance, which looks nothing like our reality. He's the pioneer of an art movement called Cubism. Imagine painting like you're making a puzzle with shapes and colors. You may have a face in the artwork somewhere, but instead of eyes, nose, and mouth in their usual places, they're scattered like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. It's as if you're seeing different sides of a person all at once. Even the subject matter is now different. Older paintings show us things from history or representations of well-known myths. Meanwhile, contemporary art touches other subjects too, like social issues or first-hand experiences. Take Frida Kahlo, for example. She's famous for her autobiographical paintings, where she shared with the world different struggles from her life. In fact, she started painting when she was a teenager, after a bus accident left her with serious injuries. Confined to bed, she used a mirror that was placed above her to capture her own image, expressing her pain and emotions through vibrant colors and surreal self-portraits. Back when Da Vinci was painting his artworks, it was the rich who were mostly influencing artists. Most of the time, people with means would commission paintings to send out a clear message or simply out of vanity. Contemporary artists can paint whatever they want. The problem is gathering an audience and selling your pieces. And it's not just the paintings that have changed over the years. If you're a fan of sculptures, you might have noticed a difference too. Take sculptures made in ancient Greece and Egypt. Sculptors back then were focused on perfection and ideal proportions. They also used materials like marble and bronze and crafted their pieces through carving and casting. Today's sculptors have a larger variety of materials: plastic, fiberglass, resin, you name it. If you're feeling creative, you can try all sorts of different art challenges at home too. Browse through some YouTube videos featuring art challenges to find ideas. And while you're at it, be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. After that, you can try making cardboard sculptures, castles using just some sand you found at the beach, and even miniature statues using magnets. Also, why not use Legos? Although to top the current record for the biggest Lego sculpture, you'll need more than 5 million of those tiny pieces. The artwork depicted a replica of the Tower Bridge and was over 42 feet high. What about music? It's one of the oldest ways of artistic expression. Archaeologists found ancient bone flutes that were over 40,000 years old. In ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, for example, music was popular, often used in important ceremonies. Back then, they used instruments like lyres, harps, and pan flutes. During the Baroque era, composers like Bach were the equivalent of pop idols. And for good reason, since their music is still famous today. Bach, for instance, still has millions of monthly listeners on popular streaming platforms, centuries after his passing. The 20th century brought music you're a bit more familiar with, like jazz, blues, rock and roll, hip-hop, and electronic. But unlike paintings, where the older it is, the more expensive a piece of art can get, when it comes to music, things are a bit more complicated. Figuring out the greatest song of all time is hard, especially since we don't have a lot of data from previous centuries. Rolling Stones magazine claims Aretha Franklin's song, Respect, should take the crown, but not everyone agrees. The most recorded song in history? Some might say the Beatles' Yesterday, with 4,000 versions, or 6,600 recordings of Amazing Grace. But both of those pale in comparison to a tune by George Gershwin called Summertime, recorded over 67,000 times. These days, you can use artificial intelligence to create music yourself. And here's how this software works. Most of it relies on deep learning. This teaches the computer to compose music by showing it loads of tunes that already exist. The computer then figures out the patterns and structures in the information provided. After that, it starts putting out brand new compositions. Once these AI music makers have had enough training, you can give them all sorts of info to make music, like tempo, key, and genre. Now, literature isn't what it used to be either. Ancient Greeks, for instance, used hexameters, a kind of poetic tempo. It was during this time that the legendary Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Greeks also invented drama, as in the theatrical genre. They started this tradition in Athens around the 6th century BCE. Even back then, such performances had exquisite costumes, dances, and amazing stage setups. Contemporary literature includes stuff that's been written after the 1950s. A lot of interesting techniques have been used in novels ever since, like stories that jump around in time, and characters you don't know if you can trust. Authors today are also not afraid to break the fourth wall by directly addressing the reader. When it comes to the best-selling book of all time, things get a bit complicated to estimate as well. But for most people, their best guess is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Some reports claim it's been sold over 200 million times all over the world. Not to mention it was translated in over 100 languages. Hey, read all about it.
Imagine you're an art detective, and your task is to explore the mysteries behind the world's most famous paintings. I'm talking about works from Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Picasso. So, grab your magnifying glass, as this journey is about to begin. First off on your list is Rome. After enjoying delicious pasta, you head to the Sistine Chapel, home to the world's most famous ceiling. Oh, and you know how they say Michelangelo painted the frescoes lying down? This is just a myth. Actually, the painter created a complex system of platforms that allowed him to paint standing. You're checking out the creation of Adam, that fresco in the middle. The Italian artist Michelangelo, the author of this masterpiece, was widely known for his study of human anatomy. Art experts argue that the right part of the painting is an anatomically correct depiction of an enlarged brain. To proof-check this, you try overlapping a picture of the organ and the artwork. It seems to be a match. The cerebellum, the optic nerve, and the pituitary gland are all there. Even the floating green scarf thingy appears to match the vertebral artery. Some researchers think it was Michelangelo's way of depicting knowledge and wisdom, but you have to sleep on it to decide what you think. Moving on, you catch a train and arrive in Florence. Time for a quick gelato break, then straight to the Accademia Gallery. One of art's most celebrated sculptures is waiting for you inside, Michelangelo's David. David is a 17-foot tall marble wonder. It was carved for about 3 years. The mystery surrounding it is to figure out the statue's true expression. Looking at him from below, you'll think his face is serene and peaceful. But art historians argue that this work was largely misunderstood. Apparently, his body hides a very different story. Take a closer look, and you'll notice his brows are frowning, and the veins in his arms are popping out. That doesn't look too relaxed, does it? Michelangelo's idea was to depict David right before an important confrontation, so maybe he wasn't all that serene after all. Italy is so rich in art, you can't leave just yet. You're still in Florence. You pay a visit to the famous Uffizi Gallery. Many famous paintings are hosted by this museum, but you're checking out Botticelli's Primavera, or Spring. This artwork is mysterious from the get-go. Experts can't say the exact year it was commissioned. It remained untitled for years, until the painter Giorgio Vasari finally came up with a name for it. Usually, when critics and viewers admire this painting, they focus on the figures in the foreground. But in this case, the actual work lies in that Botticelli painted over 46 different plant species with almost identical precision. And, in the painting overall, these plant figures are repeated over 200 times. Unbelievable! I'd say the last visits were full of impressions, weren't they? Ready to keep going? A plane ride later, you arrive in Paris, the city of lights, berets, and the famous Mona Lisa. You go through the Muséum du Louvre and come to Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, La Gioconda. There are many theories regarding this work of art, and you dive into some of them. A strong case has been made that the Mona Lisa could be a self-portrait of da Vinci himself. Historians have thoroughly compared da Vinci's face and that of the Mona Lisa. And guess what? They appear to be strikingly similar. Oh, and then there's the smirk theory. Dentist and art expert Joseph Bartowski claims to have discovered the secret behind Mona Lisa's smirk. He says her tight facial expression is a typical indication of someone who lost their front teeth. Could it be so? Also, in 2010, the Italian Committee for Cultural Heritage found a collection of symbols hidden in the painting. These are only visible through highly technological magnifying lenses, but they showed that Leonardo inscribed an LV inside Mona Lisa's right eye. Experts guess that this is Da Vinci's signature. But the other symbols, a CE in the left eye and a 72 in the arch of the background bridge, are still very mysterious. Phew! You covered a lot of ground on this one. Ah, of course, at the end of your visit, remember to test if her eyes really follow you around. Now you're headed to Amsterdam to check out the Rijksmuseum. You came to see a specific Rembrandt painting that hides a mysterious story. The Night Watch is one of Rembrandt's most famous paintings, but experts argue that the name of the painting and its content are mismatched. Let's take a closer look. The painting depicts a large group ready to embark on a mission. Rembrandt's technique is called chiaroscuro, highlighting the contrast between light and shade. Until 1947, art critics believed the painter was depicting a nighttime scene. But when the painting was cleared of a thick dust layer, it became clear that the scene was happening in broad daylight, with the sun streaming down from the top left. Now, it's too late to change its name to the Day Watch. While in Amsterdam, you find a museum dedicated to Van Gogh's art. Did you know that he painted over 900 paintings during an impressive period of only 10 years? Anyway, the Van Gogh Museum hosts the biggest collection of yellow sunflower paintings you'll probably see in your life. Actually, almost all of Van Gogh's paintings feature dominant yellow shades. This particularity of his art may be a result of how he saw the world. Some art experts have speculated that one of Van Gogh's remedies changed his color perception, making him see more yellow around him. Okay, so this trip just keeps getting better. The next stop on your list is the United Kingdom. Then, on to the National Gallery. You may spend hours looking at Jan van Eyck's painting Arnolfini Portrait and not see anything out of the ordinary. In the foreground, a couple holds hands and stares at the viewer. But if you zoom in on the mirror on the wall, you'll see two more people in the room. Art experts say the male figure in the painting has his hands raised to greet these two people seen in the mirror, and that one of the figures is Van Eyck himself. Oh, and that's not the only watermark the painter left. Above the mirror, you'll see his flamboyant signature. Jan van Eyck was here, 1434. And speaking of people trying to sneak into their art, Caravaggio, the renowned Italian Renaissance painter, left a little Easter egg in one of his famous paintings, Bacchus. This one is a bit difficult to spot. In the half-filled jar in the bottom left corner of the painting, there is a tiny self-portrait of the painter himself, hidden amongst the liquid. To see the image clearly, one needs the help of sophisticated technology, or at least a very efficient magnifying lens. But it's there, a male figure, aka Caravaggio, with a brush in his hand. Fun fact, the tiny self-portrait was first noticed in 1922, over 300 years after the painting was completed. It was forgotten due to poor conservation. To finish the trip, you fly overseas across the Atlantic, all the way to Chicago. The enormous collection of the Art Institute hosts a well-known painting by Pablo Picasso, The Old Guitarist. This painting's secret is so well hidden that it also needs the help of X-ray machines and super fancy technology. But the results are worth it. The readings show that Picasso painted The Old Guitarist on top of another unfinished painting. We can clearly see the outlines and shapes of a half-drawn female figure that Picasso gave up on mid-work. The emerging artists of the time used that way of saving money quite often, as canvases were expensive. This was quite a tiring world trip, wasn't it? Get some rest, Sherlock of Art.
Hey, if you think Stonehenge is one of the oldest stone monuments ever, well, let me introduce you to Göbekli Tepe. Buckle up, we gotta travel to Turkey to meet this really old guy. Yeah, he's too old to travel. Jokes aside, Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site located in southeastern Turkey that dates back to the Neolithic period, around 10,000 BCE. It's considered to be one of the oldest and most significant archaeological discoveries in recent times. The site consists of a series of circular and rectangular structures made of stone pillars. Yeah, it does look like its younger brother Stonehenge. Some of those pillars are decorated with intricate carvings of animals and other symbols. Now, you may be wondering, hey, why on earth did they make such a fascinating building? What was its purpose? Sorry, I got no answer for that. The purpose of the site is still unknown, but it is believed to have been a ceremonial center for the ancient people who lived in the area. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe has challenged long-held beliefs about the development of human civilization, as it suggests that complex societies may have emerged much earlier than previously thought. Okay, pack your stuff, our travels just started. Next destination, Masada. It's an ancient fortress located in Israel on a plateau overlooking the Dead Sea. Hey, look at that view, spectacular, huh? It was built by King Herod the Great in the 1st century BCE, and it was very smartly built. Within the fortress, there were various facilities such as storehouses, barracks, a palace, and a set of cisterns capable of holding approximately 40,000 cubic meters of rainwater. People living there believed that the collected runoff from a single day's rainfall could provide sustenance for over 1,000 individuals for a period of 2 to 3 years. Access to the fortress was limited to 3 steep and winding paths leading up to fortified gates. Still, at one point, the fortress was occupied by people who had fled Jerusalem after the city was captured by the Romans. They held out against the invaders for several months, but eventually they were defeated. But these guys didn't surrender. The story of Masada has become a symbol of resistance and bravery. Today, Masada is a popular tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The next flight is going to be short. We're popping over to Egypt to see the Karnak Temple Complex. It's a vast ancient Egyptian temple complex located in the city of Luxor, Egypt. It was built over a period of 2,000 years and covers an area of more than 200 acres. The complex is dedicated to the worship of the deity Amun-Ra. Wait a minute, that should be Amun-Ra, and it was one of the most important religious centers in ancient Egypt. The Karnak Temple consists of several temples, chapels, and other buildings, including the Great Temple of Amun, the Temple of Khonsu, and the Temple of Ptah. Ptah! The Great Temple of Amun is the largest and most impressive temple in the complex, with massive columns, statues, and other decorations. One of the most famous features of the Karnak Temple complex is the Avenue of Sphinxes, which is a long avenue lined with Sphinx statues that leads from the entrance of the complex to the Great Temple of Amun. Another notable feature is the hypostyle hall, which is a massive hall with 134 columns that are over 70 feet high. The Karnak Temple complex is a popular tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's considered one of the most important archaeological sites in Egypt and provides a fascinating glimpse into the religion and culture of ancient Egypt. Hey, we can't hop on the next flight and leave Egypt until we see the Pyramid of Djoser. It has another name, by the way. It's also known as the Step Pyramid. This ancient Egyptian site is located in Saqqara. It was built during the 27th century BCE for the pharaoh Djoser by his architect Imhotep, who is considered one of the most important figures in Egyptian history. People believe this pyramid is the first monumental structure built entirely of stone and is an important example of early Egyptian architecture. The pyramid originally stood at 203 feet tall and was surrounded by a complex of buildings and courtyards. It was constructed in 6 layers, each smaller than the one below it, giving it the distinctive step-like appearance. The pyramid was used as a burial place for Pharaoh Djoser and was surrounded by a vast necropolis that contained the tombs of many other important officials. The Grateful Dead? The Pyramid of Djoser has several renovations and additions over the centuries, including the addition of a limestone casing that covered the original step structure. However, much of the pyramid was destroyed over time, and today only the central core remains. Despite this, it remains an important archaeological site and a popular tourist attraction in Egypt. Alrighty, we're ready to move on. There's one more pretty recent discovery we gotta see today. The Tower of Jericho was only discovered during excavations in the 1950s and 60s. It's an ancient stone tower located in the city of Jericho in the West Bank. Just like Göbekli Tepe, this one is believed to be one of the oldest stone structures in the world, dating back to approximately 8000 BCE. The tower stands at over 28 feet tall. It's made up of 2 main sections, an inner tower and an outer tower, which are connected by a series of stairs. The purpose of the Tower of Jericho is not entirely clear, but it is believed to have served as a defensive structure or a watchtower. It may have also had religious significance, as it was located near a sacred spring. The Tower of Jericho is a significant archaeological site and has provided valuable insights into the early history of human civilization. It's open to visitors and is a popular destination for tourists interested in ancient history. Now, this ancient site even got attention from Netflix, and they made a movie where the action takes place in Mohenjo-Daro. This site was a major center of the Indus Valley civilization in present-day Pakistan. Mohenjo-Daro was one of the largest cities of the ancient world, with a population estimated to have been around 40,000 in its peak. Trust me, that must have been a crazy megalopolis back then. The city was notable for its advanced urban planning, with sophisticated drainage and sanitation systems, and its impressive architecture, including the Great Bath and the Granary. Mohenjo-Daro was abandoned around 1900 BCE, and its ruins were only rediscovered in the 1920s. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and an important archaeological site for the study of ancient South Asian civilization. We're heading to a teeny-tiny country that has quite an impressive history. Welcome to Malta. The Tsigantia Temples are a Neolithic site located on the Mediterranean island of Gozo. They're probably one of the oldest freestanding structures in the world, dating back to around 3600 to 3200 BCE. The temples consist of 2 megalithic structures, each with multiple rooms and altars. The name Tsigantia means giant tower in Maltese, as people believe that only giants could have built such massive structures. The temples are believed to have been used for religious purposes and are considered to be an important example of prehistoric architecture. They were added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1980. Well, you must be pretty tired, but there's one more place we gotta visit today. Our plane is already landing in Armenia, and we're here to see the Temple of Garni. Look, this one is well preserved. This temple dates back to the 1st century CE. It was built by King Tiridates I as a dedication to the sun deity Mir. Sadly, the temple was destroyed in the 17th century during an earthquake, which is quite a common thing for this area, but it was later reconstructed in the 20th century. Today, it's a popular tourist attraction and is also listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Hello, Brightsiders! Do you know what's hidden inside President Lincoln's head or at the Grand Station Terminal in New York? Today, I will reveal secrets about America's best-known landmarks you have never heard of. At the towering granite faces of Mount Rushmore, there's a hidden chamber inside President Lincoln's head, built initially to hold essential documents from US history. The original plan was to create a much larger carving of several vital moments in American history. Unfortunately, it was far too complicated to be completed, and a Hall of Records was chosen instead. The construction stopped for many years with the room left unfinished. However, the project was revived in late 90s and they completed the chamber. The hidden room tells the US's story to future generations, a time capsule of American history. Sadly, tourists can't access the secret room as it's too difficult to reach. Anyone running through the Grand Central Terminal to get to their train on time knows that you work up quite a sweat. Some hidden Manhattanites are also working up a sweat somewhere else at the station. Few commuters realize that the Grand Central Terminal has been home to a tennis club for decades. It mainly serves local sports fans and corporate groups, so most people don't even know it exists. Vanderbilt Tennis Club is located on the station's upper levels and includes a full gymnasium, one full-sized indoor hard court, and even a junior court. While it might seem strange to join, the Tennis and Fitness Club is quite popular among the locals. Most of the Supreme Court building is what you'd expect: courtrooms, offices, and other generally dull workspaces. But that's until you get to the 5th floor. The building has a hidden basketball court, nicknamed the highest court in the land. This court is frequented by many of the building's workers. The room was initially designed as a storage space, but some people started turning it into a makeshift court to practice their tennis game. The trend took off, and eventually it turned into a basketball court we know today. One of the most fascinating things about Niagara Falls is how naturally falling water is used to generate energy. The falls had slowed to a trickle or even stopped because of freezing and ice on several occasions. But a little known secret of the falls is that they can be turned off. And in 1969, the US Army Corps of Engineers did just that. To generate hydroelectric power, engineers developed ways to control the water's flow and fall to get the most out of it. All this water causes lots of erosion, so a facelift was planned. Unfortunately, the plan ended up being a bit of a failure. Meanwhile, this lady is no failure. She's an icon, a symbol of hope, and one of the most recognizable figures in the world. And she wears size 879 shoes. The Statue of Liberty is one of the most recognizable structures in the USA and in the world. In 1886, the monument wasn't just symbolic. For 16 years, the statue functioned as a fully operational lighthouse. Tourists at the US landmark can head to her crown for a stunning city view, but there used to be a room in the torch that could be accessed. Unfortunately, the ladder to the torch room was damaged by a shockwave from a nearby explosion, making the room inaccessible from 1916 until today. And it hasn't welcomed any visitors since. When the Brooklyn Bridge was first under construction, the engineers faced two significant problems. Well, the city didn't have enough money to pay for the whole project. That's a first. And local wineries were refusing to relocate out of the path of the construction. The engineer managed to find a great solution to both problems. They helped finance the bridge by building wine cellars and renting them out to local businesses that needed the extra storage. That's a pretty genius approach to financing a bridge, actually. Today, the city of New York has taken ownership of the cellars and stripped the caverns of their original functionality. Now, they are primarily unused and full of maintenance equipment. Disneyland has fast become one of the most famous landmarks in America. Hardcore fans might think they know all of the park's secrets, but some might even surprise regular parkgoers. Hidden behind an unmarked door in Disneyland's New Orleans Square, you can find a posh, expensive restaurant called Club 33. If dining here is on your to-do list for your next vacation, you better start saving your money right now. The price to enter is a little expensive, costing around $25,000 to join, plus an annual fee of $12,000. If you feel wrong about never being a part of Club 33, maybe this will cheer you up. The waiting list can be up to 14 years long, and even Walt Disney himself never got to see it. The Golden Gate Bridge was once the world's longest suspension bridge. This eye-catching 1.7-mile-long feat of engineering was completed in 1937. While many people know that the bridge is constantly being repainted, did you know that the paint color, which looks red, is called International Orange? Interestingly, the color was just a primer, but it turned out to be quite visible through the thick fog. The bridge's original color plan was suggested to be black with yellow stripes to maximize its visibility for passing ships. That's quite an ugly combination, I think. Most people who visit the Lincoln Memorial are in awe of the size and view of the reflecting pool. Some even spend all of their energy trying to find the famous typo carved into the walls. In the line, "With high hope for the future," the sculptor mistakenly spelled the future with an E instead of an F. Yet they tried filing it in, but the typo is still visible. Visiting the Gateway Arc to look at the city of St. Louis is like looking back in time. Most visitors don't know that the Arc also provides a glimpse back to its construction. Built to withstand earthquakes and high winds, the Arc can move and bend as much as 18 inches in high winds. The Arc is the tallest national monument in the United States, standing at 630 feet. Few people realize that it's 630 feet wide as well. That's impressive. The most peculiar thing about this spectacular construction isn't just its story, but that it also contains the stories of over 600,000 people from St. Louis. Hidden underneath the deluxe Walford Astoria Hotel is a secluded platform called Track 61, part of the Grand Central Terminal. A railway car believed to be designed for President Franklin D. Roosevelt was left in the station for decades before being removed. This private train car was able to pull into the underground station where he could come and go unseen by the public. Unfortunately, the car turned out to be just for transporting parts of construction materials, which is not really as cool as transporting a president. The Liberty Bell features one of history's most famous repair jobs. Well, actually, lack of repair jobs. The bell was tested, split, and repaired when first received. And it just got worse from there. After nearly 90 years of use, a narrow crack formed in the Liberty Bell in 1840s. When the city of Philadelphia sought to repair the bell in 1846, metal workers made the crack even worse. Attempts were made to repair the existing rupture in the bell, but it was subsequently fractured beyond repair. After all of this, it had to be taken out of service for good. The bell we see today is just a replica. Not one person alive today has heard the authentic original sound of the bell. That's all for today, and guys, remember, let's learn something new every day together with Brightside.